David, you're an independent finance and tax expert with, I know, a specialist knowledge relating to cars, but it's a notoriously complicated subject. So for me, in simple terms, can you explain what the benefits are of running a hybrid vehicle?
Well, we all know for business users, the cost of a vehicle is heavily influenced by tax, and tax is linked to emissions. In simple terms, the cleaner the car, the lower the tax. Now, over the last decade or so, we've seen cars getting much cleaner, and not just hybrids.
So you've got to say, in many respects, this kind of approach, this taxation penalty, has been successful in reducing emissions.
Yes, in some respects, almost too successful. They estimate that the government is now losing millions a year just because cars are getting cleaner, and tax revenues are therefore reducing. They're now turning their attention to other emissions, not just CO2, but things like particulate matter and NOx. Now, that's not an issue for hybrids, which already produce very low levels of NOx and no particulate matter. But for diesels, it's a potential problem.
So very much a question of kind of watch this space if you're already running a diesel.
Yes, but if we look at the legislation as it currently stands, so let's compare a big seller in the C segment like a Ford Focus with a Toyota Auris hybrid. We'll look at it from two perspectives, the drivers and the companies.
Okay, so if I'm a company car driver, I'm going to put that hat on now. What's in it for me?
Well, as a company car driver, you're basically going to be interested in two things. First, is it the car you want? Does it drive to a standard that you like? Secondly, how much tax am I going to pay for it?
Okay, so run me some numbers.
So in this case, I'm comparing a diesel Ford Focus 2-litre TDCi Z-Tech with the Toyota Auris Hybrid Icon grade, both with similar engine power and price. Compare the Toyota with the Ford Focus and you can see the difference. Now, in terms of personal taxation calculated on the P11D value of the car multiplied by the benefit in kind percentage, the Toyota driver would pay over £2,250 less over a 3-year period. If we work on the basis that the driver also uses his company car for, say, 10,000 private miles a year, then you get a pretty clear idea of the savings. And if the gap between diesel and petrol prices increases, this benefit will grow. In this case, the driver will be better off by over £3,000 over that 3-year period.
I've got to say, that is a lot of money.
Yes, so it makes great sense for the driver. Now, let's take a look at it from the company's position working on those two same cars. The company pays Class 1A national insurance, which is payable at the rate of 13.8%, based on the car's benefit in kind value. Over the next 3 years, that's a saving of over £780. Then the company has to pick up the cost of business fuel. Let's be conservative and again work on 10,000 business miles a year. That's another £900 saved compared to the Ford Focus over 3 years. So we already have a saving of almost £1,700 and we haven't considered the tax relief through capital allowances for the company yet.
Okay, so I'm with you so far, but when you start talking about tax relief, isn't that getting into something pretty complicated?
Well, yes and no. The important fact to remember is that the company will be able to reclaim 100% first-year capital allowances on the Auris, compared with just 18% on the Focus. That means the company tax bill can be reduced by almost £4,800 for the tax year 2012-13, against just £853 for the Focus. That leaves more working capital in the business, which, assuming a typical return on investment, could generate the company around £1,200 over 3 years.
But you don't get capital allowance if you lease the car, do you?
Not directly, but for 2012-13, the leasing company does, and that should be reflected back into the rentals.
So we're not talking just, a few pounds here. We're actually talking worthwhile amounts of money. Between the company and the driver, there's a saving of almost £6,000, and that's just on one car. I mean, for a typical small business running, say, 3 cars, they could easily save over £18,000. I've got to say, that's not bad for a few minutes' work. But what if I wanted to be a little bit cunning? As an employer, I perhaps couldn't afford to give my staff a pay rise this year. If I changed them from, say, a Ford to a Toyota, I mean, they'd effectively feel like they've had a pay rise because that £3,000 over 3 years, that would translate to about £80 a month extra in their pocket.
Yes, but that's not all. The numbers are so good on a hybrid that I'm going to take our driver out of the same Ford and put them into a bigger Prius and put money in their pocket, even though the Prius has a list price of around £1,800 more. Despite this, over 3 years, a 40% taxpayer will pay over £2,900 less than the driver of the Focus.
Okay, so I mean that's great news, the driver's a great win, but I guess there's going to be some additional costs somewhere along the line for the company.
Okay, Class 1A national insurance, Prius wins by over £710. In fuel, the Prius wins by £850. So that's already a saving of more than £1,500. And let's not forget road fund licence, where the Prius wins by £60 a year. Add the profit generated by increased capital allowances and you have a potential saving of more than £3,000.
So by changing to a Toyota hybrid, I can certainly save some money as a driver. I can also save some money as a company. And as a company, it's got to be a great way of giving an employee a little bit more money and a bigger car. I mean, it's win-win.
Absolutely. There's a potential for a combined saving for the company and the driver of over £6,000.
Well, I've got to say, David, in a few minutes you've made it much easier to understand than my accountant does, and he charges for this advice. But if I wanted to go back and work some really specific numbers, you know, based on my own company and the cars that I run, what do I do next?
Jason, it's complicated even for accountants, and that's why tax and cash flow, it's often simply ignored in whole life cost calculations. But as we've seen, to do so, it's a very, very expensive mistake. So for this reason, Toyota have developed some unique software to help companies understand exactly what their costs really are. And together with an interactive tax guide, it will help walk you through this very complicated minefield.
David, that sounds really useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.